Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's Assa Abloy Academy virtual instructor-led training on accessible door hardware. My name is Katie Flower. I will be your lead instructor for today. Within 24 hours after attending this course, you will receive an email as a thank you, and it's also your proof for continuing education. You can use it to self-report and get 1 credit hour in whatever agency or association that you need the credit for. Also, this session is being recorded and it will be on the Assa Abloy Academy website for you to review as often as you would like to. If you go to the virtual instructor-led training page, the top right-hand corner will have a link to previously recorded sessions. And as I mentioned, you can watch this as often as you would like to refresh your memory. I will be taking questions today. If you have a question on your Zoom control panel, there is a Q&A button. Feel free to type in your question and send it. I will save 10 to 15 minutes at the end of the presentation to answer any remaining questions that might be out there. This course is going to teach you about the origin of the Americans with Disabilities Act, as well as its application and administration. Our focus will be on the standard for accessible and usable buildings and facilities for door and hardware requirements, otherwise known as ANSI A117.1, and specifically the 2009 edition. The Americans with Disabilities Act is a civil rights law, and it was first passed in 1990. The Department of Justice regulates Title III, which applies to public buildings. It requires that buildings are designed on Chapter 11 from the IBC, and it references standards ICC ANSI A117.1. Our door and hardware requirements are based on this standard, and the references in this course are based on the 2009 edition. Federal facilities are not covered by ADA, but they do have an earlier law that they need to meet, and that is the ABA, the Architectural Barriers Act. It's separate, it's different, but it's very similar standards, and that would apply to state and local government facilities. Places of public accommodation are facilities that affect commerce, and they fall within 12 categories that are listed in the statute. For example, stores and shops, restaurants and bars, sales or rental establishments, service establishments, theaters, places of lodging, recreation facilities, assembly areas, private museums, and places of education. The ADA does not apply to religious organizations and private clubs. These are entities which historically have been exempt from federal civil rights laws. I mentioned before that the International Building Code, which has been adopted by every one of the 50 states, Chapter 11 gets into the where and how many spaces along an accessible route are required based on many, many factors. And they reference ANSI A117.1 as the standard for making those spaces accessible. This is the standard design guide that's used for making buildings and facilities accessible to meet the requirements of ADA. Please know that there are other state accessibility codes. They may conflict with what ADA requires, but ADA is a minimum. If your state accessibility code exceeds that, then certainly follow your state accessibility code. But ADA is a minimum. If your state accessibility code goes under what ADA requires, you still need to follow what ADA requires. The technical criteria in this standard make sites, facilities, buildings, and elements accessible to and usable by people with such physical disabilities as the inability to walk, difficulty walking, reliance on walking aids, blindness and visual impairment, deafness and hearing impairment, incoordination, reaching and manipulation disabilities, lack of stamina, difficulty interpreting and reacting to sensory information, and extremes of physical size. The intent of these sections is to allow a person with a physical disability to independently, that's the key, to independently get to, enter, and use a site, facility, building, or element. An accessible route is a continuous, unobstructed path that connects all accessible elements and spaces in a building, facility, or site. Accessible routes shall consist of one or more of the following components, and our point of interest is the doors and doorways. Those will be found in Chapter 4. All components of an accessible route shall comply with the applicable portions of this standard. Revolving doors, revolving gates, and turnstiles shall not be part of an accessible route. Section 404 has the majority of our door and hardware requirements for accessibility compliance. And it tells us that manual doors, doorways, and gates shall comply with 404.2. A notable exception is for doors, doorways, and gates that are designed to be operated only by security personnel. They shall not be required to comply with sections 404.2.6, 0.7, and 0.8. And we'll discuss those again shortly when we cover those hardware requirements. It also says that on a pair of doors, at least one leaf of the pair shall comply. Doorways shall have a clear opening width of 32 inches minimum clear. And that clear opening width is measured for swinging doors between the face of the door and the stop, with the door open at 90 degrees. There will be no projections into the clear opening width lower than 34 inches above the floor, and projections into the clear opening width between 34 inches and 80 inches above the floor shall not exceed 4 inches. That gives you room for your door hardware. Your hardware, whether it's for egress purposes or ADA, will be between 34 and 48 inches above the finished floor. And so it falls into this range. Most exit devices do not project more than 4 inches. Most levers and operable hardware will not project off the face of the door. So we don't need a measure from the hardware, it's from the face of the door. And that matches what it calls for means of egress clearance. And it's nice when a standard and a code or two codes match each other and there is no conflict. Here's an example of measuring the door from the face of the door to the face of the stop. We put a ruler on the stop so that it can project, so that you can, when we zoom in on the tape measure, you can see that a 3-foot door, an 1 3/4 thick door that's hung on butt hinges or continuous hinges or offset pivots in a hollow metal frame, a wood frame, or even an aluminum frame will give you 3 inches less than the nominal width as clear width. So it's very easy. If you've got a single door, subtract 3 inches from the nominal width for an 1 3/4 thick commercial door, because most of the time we're dealing with floor plans and there's nothing to measure. So subtracting 3 inches for a single door will give you your clear opening width, and a 3-foot door gives us 33 inches and exceeds the 32 inches minimum clear. If you do need to get more room, a swing clear hinge will get the door out of the opening at 90 degrees, and you will gain the full thickness of the door leaf. So you can gain an extra 1 3/4 inches. And that can help you with some existing doors that may need to comply with ADA. The minimum height of a door in a means of egress and for accessibility is 80 inches is the minimum height. There is an exception for door closers and door stops, which shall be permitted to be 78 inches minimum above the floor. The standard does not specifically mention maglocks. Our newer building codes are starting to address that, since a maglock does hang down into the opening like you can see in the picture. You want to make sure not to use a 6'8" high door, because that would hang down too low for your vertical clear opening height. Table 404.2.3.2 shows maneuvering clearances at manual swinging doors. They do have illustrations in the standard if you need to look at those. It depends on whether you have a front side approach coming in from the hinge side, from the push side, or the pull side of the door, and whether you're perpendicular to or parallel with the door. And what I want to point out on this slide is you need to add 6 inches if there's a closer and latch provided, or add 6 inches for a closer, or 12 inches beyond the latch if a closer and latch is provided in certain instances. You can see the footnotes. So what hardware that you have on the door makes the door a little harder to maneuver, and that's why you need to add extra room for the clearances. If provided, a threshold shall be no higher than a ½ inch in height, and raised thresholds and changes in door levels shall comply with section 302 and 303. If you have more than a change of height of a ½ inch, then your threshold needs to be designed like a ramp, like the picture in the lower bottom. And that is with a slope no greater than 1 in 12. Handles, pulls, latches, and locks, and other operable parts on accessible doors shall have a shape that is easy to grasp with one hand and does not require tight grasping, pinching, or twisting of the wrist to operate. Lever handles and pull handles will meet that requirement. Here is a lever handle, and you can see that you can use the side of your hand. A thumb piece or turn piece, a turn piece on a deadbolt is accessible as long as the pivot point is either at the top or the bottom. If it's in the center, it makes it much harder to manipulate the thumb turn without the tight grasping and pinching and twisting of the wrist to operate. Doorknobs are pretty much obsolete because they require the tight grasping and pinching and twisting of the wrist. The thumb piece on that exit device trim requires pinching in order to pull back the latch, and these are not okay unless they're used for security purposes that are not used for normal operation. So for maintenance purposes only, if you have a mechanical room or something like that. The lever handles are, here's a question. The lever handles are all shown as being horizontal. Are there any rules against having the lever mounted vertically? Vertical mounting makes it harder to operate the door tools for bypass. As long as it meets the requirement of not having to be tightly grasped to twist the wrist to operate, then it would meet the requirements of ADA. You may need a larger back set, and I think that might be what you are referring to as far as it's harder to get your hand in there because of the door frame being so close. If you find out that that's not approved, then that may be the reason why. You may need a larger back set. Question came up, a clear opening with swing clear hinges would still be measured between the face of the stops. I believe you said we would get the full width of the door. Not the full width of the door, because you still have a 5/8 stop on one side and the 5/8 stop on the other. What I said was you're going to be able to pick up that 1 3/4, whatever the thickness of the door. Yes, you're measuring from the face of the door to the face of the stop when the door is open 90 degrees, but now the face of that door is right in line with the face of the stop. So whatever between doorstop to doorstop would be your clear open width. Good question. Regarding the height, the operable parts of hardware shall be between 34 and 48 inches maximum above the floor. When you have sliding doors and they're in the fully open position, operating hardware shall be exposed and usable from both sides. And this matches what the IBC requires for hardware height on doors and a means of egress. There is an exception, locks that are used only for security purposes and not used for normal operation shall not be required to comply with section 404.2.6. For example, you have a deadbolt on the door and it's keyed, and only security, it will be open when open to the public and usable, and you just can use the pull handle to get in. The door is not locked. That lock is for security purposes, and security personnel will lock the door after hours. That can be located at any height. Door closers shall be adjusted so that from an open position of 90 degrees, the time that is required to move the door to an open position of 12 degrees shall be 5 seconds minimum. And this can happen. All commercial door closers have a sweep speed valve, and you can slow down that range to 5 seconds, no problem. Delayed action closers are not required, but they are recommended on interior accessible openings to give someone extra time to move through the opening with less fighting with the door once it's open. Delayed action, when you open the door to 90 degrees and let go, instead of the door closer starting to close immediately and going into the sweep speed, the delayed action will delay the closing for 3 seconds or 5 seconds, whatever you adjust the valve for, before the door starts to close. And again, that's not a requirement, but it's nice to specify delayed action on any door that's interior that you may need a little extra time getting through. Spring hinges can be used on doors that are accessible. If you do use them, they need to be adjusted so that from an open position of 70 degrees, the door shall be closed in 1.5 seconds minimum. Opening forces do not apply to the force required to retract the latch bolts or disengage other devices that hold the door in a closed position. And when you have two codes that conflict, the more restrictive one will take precedence. In this case, the ADA standard recognizes the importance of ensuring that fire doors need to have the spring power to close and latch the door. There is no minimum opening force on exterior doors. However, many building owners choose to use automatic door operators or power assist to help make them more accessible. That is something that will be changing in the future as the newer codes adopt that. Proper installation of your door closers is critical in order to get the full benefit of your spring power adjustment, as well as the sweep and latch speed. And this is what it says in NFPA 80, which is the standard for fire doors and other opening protectives. So on all non-fire rated doors, interior doors, to meet ADA, 5 pounds maximum opening force. Fire doors take priority over ADA, and there is no minimum requirement for the 5 pounds of opening force like there would be for other interior doors. Adjusting the spring tension, the latch and closing speed is critical to ensure that the fire door closes and latches each time. Now, you may be able to adjust the door closer on a fire door, and you might be able to get the 5 pounds of opening force, but because usually you have smoke seal and the locations of where the fire doors are, you probably are going to have a little bit higher. You want to have, if it's going to take 6 pounds of force, then you don't want any more than 6. You don't want to ramp it up to 8 pounds. You want to make it as low as possible, but still meet the requirements for closing and latching. The door surfaces within 10 inches of the floor need to be smooth on the push side, extending the full width of the door. Parts created by horizontal or vertical joints shall be within a 1/16 of an inch, the same plane of the door, and cavities that are created between the glass and the door need to be capped. If you're using kick plates over the top of the light kit to get that 10-inch bottom rail, you would need to cap it. There's a question regarding ADA height for pull handles. If the pull handle is large, does the entire handle need to be within the 48-inch height? No. Sometimes you'll have a pull handle that's full height of the door, and that's fine because the range is between 34 and 48, the part that you need to grasp. You're not going to grasp the top of the door unless maybe you're Dallas Maverick basketball player or something like that. But good question. As long as the handle is large enough to be within that 34, no higher than 48 inches for anybody to use, then it would be okay. Regarding the lower 10 inches, sometimes you'll see surface vertical rod exit devices, less bottom rod. That way you get the smooth surface on the push side on the bottom of the door. If you do need top and bottom latching on a door for security purposes, then you could go with a concealed vertical rod exit device and still have that smooth bottom portion of the door. There are some exceptions. And sliding doors are not required to comply with that section on door surfaces being 10 inches. Tempered glass doors that don't have stiles and have a bottom rail or shoe with the top leading edge that's tapered no less than 60 degrees from the horizontal shall not be required to comply with the 10-inch bottom rail height. And doors that do not extend to within 10 inches of the floor shall not be required to comply with this section either. And that makes sense. And those types of doors would be like a toilet partition door where maybe it's 12 inches off the floor. That doesn't need to have a 10-inch bottom rail. Here are some designs of bottom rails on all glass doors that would comply with ADA by being tapered or 10 inches. And then another look at a tapered rail, 60-degree taper, and that's acceptable. And then this does not have to be 10 inches high. It could be 4 inches high. Doors and side lights adjacent to doors containing one or more glazing panel that permits viewing through the panels shall have the bottom of at least one panel on either the door or the adjacent side light, 43 inches maximum above the floor. And there is an exception to this. Vision lights with the lowest part more than 66 inches above the floor shall not be required to comply with this section. Those with a vision light are typically used in stairs. And while you may use a stair as an area of refuge and you can wheel your wheelchair and wait in a safe area of refuge, it's not cross traffic. You're going to have people leaving the building, not coming in at the same time. And that's what the requirement is for, is a door in a corridor. If you're in a wheelchair, you need to be able to see if somebody's on the other side so that you don't push the door into them or you have any issues. So either the side light or the door, 43 inches to the bottom of the glass. Power operated doors are not required yet by this standard. However, if you use them, they must meet the requirements of the standards for either high energy or low energy operators. So full power operators would meet the requirements of ANSI BHMA A156.10 and power assist and low energy operators complying with ANSI BHMA A156.19. And this is pretty much the end. So if you have any questions, feel free to type them in. I do want to point out, if you haven't used this tool, there's a Assa Abloy Egress calculator. It's about 1 year old. It's an excellent tool that you can use on your desktop, tablet, or smartphone. You can calculate the occupant load, egress width, quantity of exits, swing direction of doors, all based on the International Building Code. Has a drop-down menu so that you can select which IBC that your project falls under. It is a free tool that you can save as a favorite, bookmark it. You can download and save a PDF of your project information for future reference, and it has the code references for hardware, things like delayed egress, exit devices, and it tells you where in the IBC to look up that information. We also have monthly courses on ASA Abloy Academy. The next one is in the next couple of weeks. If you want to look at the virtual instructor-led training and look for calculating occupant loads and egress width. And that is the end of the presentation for today. Is there any further questions? If you have any questions on codes and door hardware and code compliant hardware, feel free to email me at catherine.flower@asaabloy.com. We just started a new YouTube channel called Door Hardware Nerds, and that's on YouTube. I have a sub channel called Code Corner with Katie, and I answer one code question a month. We're going to try to get it to twice a month once we get going, but very short videos on some of the more common code questions that people have, and anywhere from 2 minutes to 6 minutes per video. And it'd be great if you went in there and watched it and liked and subscribed. If there are no questions, I want to thank you for your attendance and hope to see you again at another ASA Abloy virtual instructor-led training in the future. We do have a question. Are there any exemptions for older buildings with narrow doorways or lock hardware that do not comply? The answer is yes, there are exemptions for older buildings. ADA was never meant to be something that made you renovate your entire building. If your building is older, there are certain things that you can upgrade and need to upgrade, but door widths and certain, if you've got steps and things like that, there's no one size fits all answer other than talk to, if you're an architect, talk to your building inspector, and if you are a supplier, then you'd have to look on the city or state website and try to figure out what is grandfathered. Thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a wonderful day.